Okay. All righty. Well, we'll see how it goes. And if nothing else, we'll have it incorporated and ready to go. So I'll do my little pause and then we'll get started. So, my timer. No, I'm not going to start then. Okay, hold on a second. I'm glad this is why I have you here. Probably more reasons than that. Okay. All righty. So this I got a new iPhone because they suckered me into getting one because it's free. It's free.
With the
But they just keep you on your contract.
Yeah.
Um, it's got more buttons on it now, and I keep hitting stuff I don't want to hit.
I upgraded my phone and got less buttons.
What are you gonna do? Okay, welcome back to St. Luke Greek Orthodox Church. We are doing our Bible study in Genesis. We've had a little bit of a hiatus as we went through the holidays with the Nativity, Theophany, which we just went through and finished, and we had St. John the Baptist this morning, which is a wonderful liturgy. And so we are going to jump back into our regular schedule, and we'll keep working in Genesis on Wednesday nights up until we'll see if I'm going to go through Lent or not. But we'll have pre-sanctified liturgies during Lent, so usually I back off some of the other stuff. But we'll see. I haven't decided what I'm going to do yet. But we are in chapter 5. We are past, it was a great stopping point. And I'm going to explain to you why. There's some really interesting things happening here. And looks like it's going to be super boring, but we're actually going to probably talk about this chapter the whole hour. It's one of the genealogies. It's actually the first really drawn out genealogy. The others were like 3 lines or something. And this one is what, 28, 30 verses? How many verses? 31 verses. All genealogy. So you'd think all you would do is say, hey, here's a genealogy, and we'd go through it. But as we said, Hebrew literature is very different than Western literature, and the idea of genealogy is very different than it is for us. And so I'll kind of do a little review of that so we know what we're talking about. And so the first thing is a genealogy is not a like historical document. It's not something you go file at the county clerk and somebody could go look up their ancestry or something like that. It was never meant to be an exhaustive kind of, legally binding document. It's not. So in other words, it does not include every single person. Genealogies in Hebrew and in the scriptures tend to be symbolic in the sense that they use numbers to communicate certain ideas. Right. So yes, there is numerology in the Bible. It's not the weird kind of, break the code and if you find the 15th word and go down the 3rd paragraph, it's going to tell you some secret message. That stuff's all silly. I don't mean to be mean, but it's silly. Why is it doing that? Okay. And it's silly because they're doing that with translation. It's not even the Hebrew. They're doing it with an English translation of a foreign language and thinking all the numbers mean something. But they do communicate things through numbers. So one of the things they communicate is when they're talking about the divine fullness, the completion of everything, you use the number 7. It's all over Scripture. And it's obvious it comes from creation, the 6 days of creation, 7th day being the Sabbath when God rested from the work he had done. So 7 means it's the divine fullness. The number 10 usually indicates human fullness. So it is the fullest accomplishment of that period of humanity. And that'll make more sense in just a minute when I go through and show you how this works out. But those numbers communicate. So even when we go through here, the numbers of how long they lived is important, but they're not historically accurate. Okay. They did have long lifespans. You can't really argue that. And there's some theological reasons behind that, which we'll discuss a little bit. But when they say they lived to be 365 years old, what does 365 make you think of? 1 year. It's the exact number of days in a year, right? So when they're living 365, they're saying they lived the fullness of a human life. They might not have actually been 365 years old. There's another one that had his children at 182. What's 182? I'll make you do the math real quick. It's half of 365. So what it's showing is that he was not completed. He was not fully at his fullness. He had not lived his entire life. He was only halfway there. And then he began his progeny. The other thing to notice about this is it talks about the firstborn. It talks about the firstborn because your line isn't secure until you have a son, right? But once you've had a son, your line is secure, assuming that he survives. So the other children don't matter. Right now, as the second child, actually, I'm the first son, so I'd be a good woo. But you know, we look at that and we think, wow, that's so demeaning and it's so diminishing. But it's talking about the continuation of the human race. And so when you do a genealogy like this, it just wants to say this line continued through this person, who continued through this person, continued through this person, and that's where the authority of this line has gone. And we already talked a little bit about, this is important stuff. I'm sorry, I'm kind of repeating things right now, but it's good to get it back in our minds. This is important because this is when we start talking about the generations of mankind, okay? This is when we start talking about mankind as the main character in the story. Remember that chapters 1 through 4 do not have humanity as the primary subject, okay? And that's, most people read it anthropologically. They read it as a story about humans and humanity, how we started, the disobedience we made and what that happened and what happened from that. And that's part of the story. But the central character in the first 4 chapters is creation, right? So and if you think about it, it's really quite fascinating because what's going to happen in another 10 generations, remember that number 10, we're going to get to Noah. And Noah is when God decided to start over again. And he started over again by sending the flood. We'll get to that probably in a couple weeks from now. But he sends the flood, which has always been seen in the church as a type of baptism. So if you think about it within the life of a Christian and you apply that to creation, you'll begin to understand what's going on in Genesis. Okay? So God made creation perfect and good and according to his will and everything else. Corruption entered in through the humanity, the humans within his creation, who were there to keep and tend the garden, but instead chose to chase after divinity and Godhead by themselves without God. It's all the stuff we've been talking about before now. And so you get this distortion of death and unbecoming, which comes into the story. So now creation has been distorted. And that distortion lives itself out over the course of generation by generation by generation, until you get to the point where that distortion, that sinfulness is the word that we use, has gotten to the point that there are not any faithful people anywhere. None. Until, of course, you have Noah and his family, which are 7 people who are saved in the ark. See how those numbers start clicking together? You know, those numbers always, when you see a 7, you should always think, okay, divine fullness. And when you see 2 times 7, it's really, really the divine fullness. It's a way of kind of saying very, very, okay? So when he sins, so that baptism now on his good creation, which has been corrupted by sinfulness and has turned away from God, and he sends the flood to baptize creation as what they call it, a typology, to baptize creation and to give it a respite, to give it relief. And you're going to see that in the way that this chapter goes, the way it talks about Noah. And so it gives humanity a relief, consolation, and gives them another chance. And what's really fascinating about this is, what's the first thing that Noah does when he comes off the boat? No, he doesn't. No, he builds an altar.
Well,
He builds an altar. He does get drunk, but before that, what does he do? How did he get drunk?
oh,
He planted a vineyard. And so I always thought, oh, he just planted a vineyard because he remembered it from his youth. But there probably were not vineyards prior to this. The vineyard's probably something that God gifted to them as they came back to be able to gladden the hearts of men, like the Psalms say. So, so he had a respite. He had a time to reflect. He had a time to plant a vineyard. He had all these things going on. Yes, sir.
we get off track, but I think we talked about this in a previous
Sure.
episode or whatever.
An episode.
Yeah, episode.
Season 2, episode 9.
Isn't there also speculation that this is probably the first time it ever rained? Or something like that?
I have not heard that.
No? Oh. 'Cause I think
That's fascinating. I mean, I know it didn't rain in the Garden of Eden because the water came up. I mean, it missed it up. It's the first time I think we hear about rain. That could be interesting. Yeah, I've never really given that much thought, and the fathers don't really comment on it very much. I'd have to dig a little bit deeper.
I can't remember that. I thought we talked about it here, but
It could be the first time it rained. I mean, that's really kind of a fascinating little thought, and nobody would have known what to do with it. I mean, that's why everybody was, eating, drinking, and being merry, and they had no idea what was going to happen because they had no concept of a massive rainstorm. So when it started raining, they probably didn't know what it was. Interesting. It could be. But we'll get to that stuff when we get to the flood story. We'll talk more in depth about that. The fact that there's a flood story in like every single cultural story. Even Gilgamesh and all these things. They had the Sumerians, all these great flood stories. Is very fascinating too, which means there was something that happened. Anyway, so back to the genealogy. So the first 4 chapters are about creation and how creation got corrupted, okay? And how man now had to work with toil to make his living from the corrupted Adamah, the corrupted soil, and how Mary, started it all over again, and Eve suffered in childbirth as she was being obedient to God's commandment to be fruitful and multiply. So to be fruitful and multiply fell on Eve, and now it came with effort and pain and suffering. And the keep and tend the garden, to tend the soil, fell on Adam, and now that became difficult and filled with toil and suffering. Okay? So that's where we are in the story, and it's important to understand the first 4 chapters that way, or else we turn this into a anthropologically centered understanding of God and creation. Okay? It's all centered on humanity because that's the first thing that pops up. It's actually likely intentional that the story of humanity doesn't begin getting told until chapter 5. Because that's a kind of an implicit way of saying this isn't all about you, right? Yes, you are a big part of this. Yes, this is a revelation to you so you can see how to live according to my will. But creation is not about you. Creation is about creation. It's about that divine dilemma that I talked about, that now there's something outside of God for him to love, and his perfect love is erotic in the sense that it wants to be in union. And so now how does he bring union to the other, which is, of course, creation? How does he do that? And the answer to that question is humanity. And he places us there in order to kind of to bind the divine life, the Holy Trinity, together with the creation. Okay? And that's still our job, and we still mess it up, and now we have polluted this, that, and the other. I got a life straw for Christmas. I always like getting those so I can walk around and just drink from anything. You ever seen those things? It's a purifier in it. Yeah. Lucia got it for me. I was like, sweetie, you know me. I was like, yeah, I might bring one to your baptism so I can drink out of the lake. And be like, hey there. So there might be radiation in there. I might like turn into like a swamp thing or something.
Well, you just bless the lake.
Just bless the lake. It's true. So it's like, that's right, because they would say it's all super powered for you now. It's supercharged. They were like, oh, it's going to be supercharged for Mike. I love it. I mean, at least it's thinking. I mean, it's the right way to think. Anyway, okay, so that gets us all up here. And we get to chapter 5. The first line in chapter 5 is, this is the book of the generations of Adam. Okay, that word book, most people just slide over it like it's not that important, right? But that word book means not another chapter, not another story, an entire another book. Do you see how that supports this claim that chapters 1 through 4 are about something different than Adam, about the genealogy of humanity, right? So the Toledot of humanity, the Toledot, this generation, these are the generations of, or these are the descendants of, the Toledot is always a result of or a product of what came before it, right? So Adam and Eve, they are a product, a result of creation. Creation is the first Toledot. It's the first generational discussion, which happens from chapter 2 on, right? So now you've gone through that Toledot, we've gotten to Adam and Eve, and now we're going to hear about the book of the generations. That's Toledot, and it says of Adam in most Bibles, but that might just be humanity, of mankind, okay? Because it doesn't have a not direct object. What do you call the article, right? It doesn't have an article in front of it, and then it does. So it's just, it could be either or. I prefer to hear it as humanity because it's the book of the generations of humanity over against the book of the generations of heaven and earth. Make sense? Okay. So the book of the generations of Adam, that word book won't show up again until Exodus. Okay. So all the way through the patriarchs, Abraham, through Noah and the flood, through the Tower of Babel, through Abraham, through the patriarchs, all that stuff, all the way up to Moses and the Exodus, it's like halfway, 2/3 of the way through Exodus before you hear the word book again. So it's a significant, again, I never paid attention to that. I would always kind of just read right over and I'm like, okay, we're going to talk about the generations of Adam. I can skip to the next chapter now. Just wouldn't pay much attention to it. But it's important because it makes this distinction. We are now starting a new story. This isn't a continuation of the story before. This is a new story. And it starts like most Jewish stories or Hebraic, Semitic stories would start with giving you the context you need in that culture, right? So they don't really care about, the setting and all that kind of stuff. They care about who is this and who are they related to? What stream of humanity are we talking about? Because humankind always exists within a stream of what came before and what comes after. And so that's what you have here. Creation, the generations, the Toledot of what heaven and earth, of heaven and earth. Okay, now that's the containment for this. And now we're going into the stream that's Adam's descendants. That will get down to Noah, and that'll be our third Toledot that we start talking about. Now we'll talk about Noah, but it's always going to be from Adam. Does that make sense? Okay, so this is the book of the generations of Adam. We already been going almost like 15 minutes and I haven't got past the first line. Yay, I'm according to form. Okay. Let me see. Oh, Bonnie's phone's trying to get in. I need a ding there. I wonder how I do that. Mute all upon, play join and leave sound. No, I don't need that. I'm sorry. I just want to figure this out because I hate missing people as they try to come in, play join and leave sound, show not joined participants. It doesn't say anything. It will make a sound when they enter the waiting room. That's too bad. I have to look at the settings. Anyway, welcome. Sorry. So when God created, that's where it says when God created humankind. All right. So it does say the generations of Adam. I got caught up in those. When God created man, which is Adam, right? So when God created humanity, he made him in the likeness of God. Oh, never mind. I was right in the first place. Flip those. It should be the book of the generations of humanity when God created Adam, because now it's a specific individual, right? So he says when God created Adam, he made him in the likeness of God. Male and female, he created them, and he blessed them and named them Adam, mankind, when they were created. So now he's given a name to mankind, okay, humanity. It's Adam, right? Or anthropos in the Greek, or humanity in English. So God's given them this name, but do you notice when God created man, he made him in the likeness of God, male and female, he created them, and he blessed them and named them Adam. So what does that remind you of? Have we heard that? Anything along those lines before? It's chapter 1:26. Let us make man in our image, after our likeness. Let him have dominion over da 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 da. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. And God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply. Okay. So it's already now tying back into the creation story, but now it's going to focus on Adam and Eve and the kind of human story. Does that make sense? And I want to say this all because it was really a huge paradigm shift for me. I know I'm kind of kicking it a little bit like a ailing horse anyway, but it was a really huge paradigm shift for me to understand that the first 4 chapters are not about Adam and Eve in the garden. The first 4 chapters are about the garden and then what Adam and Eve's effect on the garden were. So you have all these little hints that come up after that where you have these callbacks to it. All right. So now it's saying, male and female he created him, he blessed them and named them humanity when they were created. So now it's like, okay, we're going to take up this part of the story now. Does that make sense how he's doing that? And you'll see another couple places where it goes back to chapter 4 a lot. So verse 3, when Adam had lived, 130 years, he became the father of his son in his own likeness after his image and named him Seth. That's the only time we'll hear about a descendant being made in the likeness and after his image and named him Seth. From now on, it will just be when Seth had lived 105 years, he became the father of Enosh, right? Not that he made him in his image and likeness, right? So it's very interesting what we've done now is we've established Adam as being the image and likeness of humanity, and that's the humanity that we carry with us, okay? And it's also very important, though, when we talk about image and likeness, and this is more Orthodox theology, there's nothing strictly in the text, but we've always taught that we are created in the image of God, and we are struggling to achieve the likeness of God. Okay. So the image of God is what he forms in us, which can get corrupted, and purifying that and showing forth Christ in our lives and our actions means that we've attained the likeness of God. So we would say the saints are in the likeness of God, even though we all carry the image of God. Likeness is something that we are laboring towards. All right, so he, of his own image and after his own likeness, after his image, he named him Seth. The days of Adam after he became the father of Seth were 800 years, and he had other sons and daughters. Thus, all the days that Adam lived were 930 years, and he died. Okay, this formula is going to be repeated over and over again, almost like a heartbeat. The almost direct quotes, it's just going to follow through. It does that for a reason. It does that because this is kind of the way one commentator says, this is like God's setting up the DNA. He's creating the pattern for how humanity procreates and how humanity kind of moves through history. Okay, so it's the same kind of movement of got to this point, had this child, lived to be this long, that child had this child, lived to be this long, and they divide it always when he has his first son. So you hear all these say, at 180 he had his son, and then he lived another this time, and his total life was this long. And they don't talk about the other sons and daughters. They were there, they were populating the earth. But what's important is that line was secured at this age, and then he lived this much longer. 930 years, I haven't seen any kind of meaning to that. There's a few other places where the numbers do kind of pop out a little bit, but there's probably this indication that the closer we get to Eden, the longer that we lived. It's almost like it took sin, it was generational for sin to break down what we'd experienced in Eden. That's what I hear from most commentators. That's what I hear from most people that think about it. We don't know, though. There is actually no real answer to that, why they lived for so long and then why it came slower and slower and slower. There's a couple things that hint towards what I just said, where God says that he talks about the span of a human life and how long it took to get there. So we'll talk about that whenever we come across it. So 930 years, and he died. Very short, and he died. Verse 6, we've got 2 minutes left, so we'll stop wherever we are in 2 minutes. When Seth had lived 105 years, so Adam was 130 years. Seth is 105 years. He became the father of Enosh. Seth lived after the birth of Enosh 807 years and had other sons and daughters. Thus, all the days of Seth were 912 years, and he died. Okay, you see the kind of rhythm going. When Enosh had lived 90 years, he became the father of Kenan. Enosh lived after the birth of Kenan 815 years. He had other sons and daughters. Thus, all the days of Enosh were 905 years, and he died. All right. So we had 930, 912, we're down to 905. So it's very slowly decreasing. It's not huge. So we're to Kenan. When Canaan had lived 70 years, 70, he was a young buck, right? He became the father of Mahalalel. Yeah, that one. Canaan lived after the birth of Mahalalel 840 years and had other sons and daughters. Thus, all the days of Canaan were 910 years, and he died. So you see everything going. Now, it's interesting. He was the youngest when he had his first child, and he lived 5 years longer than his dad. So it's just kind of, it's not a steady decline. It's starting to kind of dip down as we go through time. So I've got 59 seconds left. I'm going to try and say that name again. Mahalalel. It's probably got the accent somewhere else. Mahalalel. I'll do it because it's easier. Mahalalel. I don't know. It's a cool name. I'm going to name my kid that just to confuse people. All right. So when Mahalalel had lived 65 years, he became the father of Jared. Sorry. I'm sorry. The whole commercial just popped in my head. Mahalalel lived after the birth of Jared 830 years and had other sons and daughters. Thus, all the days of Mahalalel were 895 years, and he died. So now it's dropped under 900. And we will take a pause right here for those who are going to be watching on the radio or listening on the radio, I guess. And then, what we send out online. So for those of you who are listening online, come back, or I'm sorry, listening on the radio, we will pick up next week. Okay, that's a good pause. It actually makes it a lot easier when I do that because I can just find the little flat line and start from there. Anyway, okay, so what did I forget to do? I forgot to pray. There we go. I did it again, everyone. But Michael reminded me, just his face. We got to say a prayer. So do the prayer kind of in the middle of the Bible study. In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, shine within our hearts, loving Master, the pure heart of your divine, the pure light of your divine knowledge, and open the eyes of our heart to the understanding of the gospel teaching. Instill within us also reverence for your blessed commandments, having trampled upon carnal desires, we may enter into a spiritual way of living both thinking, doing only those things that are well pleasing to you. For you, Christ our God, our illumination and sanctification, do we give glory to the Father, and to the Son, and the Holy Spirit, now and forever in the ages of ages. Amen. One of these days, I won't be nearly as much fun when I actually do stuff right. Okay, so we are up to Jared. So verse 18, same pattern's going to kick in again. When Jared had lived 162 years, he became the father of Enoch. Jared lived after the birth of Enoch 800 years and had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Jared were 962 years, and he died. That's the oldest one so far, right? So Jared lived 962 years and had Enoch. Do you recognize the name Enoch? Okay, where do you recognize it from? I'm talking about from what we've read, not from knowing scriptures and knowing stuff. He's already shown up. The name has already shown up. What did Cain name his child? Oh, Enoch, right? So back in chapter 4, this is where it starts to echo. So verse 17 in chapter 4, Cain knew his wife, biblical no, and she conceived and bore Enoch. And he built a city and called the name of the city after the name of his son, Enoch. Interesting, isn't it? That now we're going to pop this name in again. So there's actually a contrast there that's really fascinating. So Enoch, Cain's Enoch, was named after the city, or the city was named after him. So he was named after the city. No reference to God, not what his name meant, all those things, right? He basically reduced him to mankind's accomplishments in building a city and all the arts and the technical kinds of stuff. Now we're going to find Enoch in Adam's lineage, who basically redeems that name. And now that name Enoch, which reminds us back to Cain, that name Enoch becomes something else. It's not self-referential to humanity. It becomes something else. What else does it become? It's the 7th generation, okay, if you've been keeping count. All right, so Adam, and then Seth, and then Enosh, and then Kenan, and then Mahalalel, and then, I did it, wow, and then Jared, and then Enoch was the 7th generation. Remember, 7 is the fullness of God's time, the fullness of the divine intent. So we have 7 generations, and now we have a human, a man, who is meeting God's intent. Okay? Yes, sir.
Wouldn't that also kind of like substantiate the claim that this is a whole book separate to the genealogies of heaven and earth?
Huh, yeah.
That would make it eight generations.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's a good observation. He was saying that if this was just a continuation of chapters 1 through 4, it would be the 8th generation, so it would kind of throw everything off. Let me see if these have these names in here. Right. All right. So now this is where most people will spend all their time on this chapter because of this very cryptic little thing that's fit in there. When Enoch had lived 65, remember I told you that, I'm sorry, I'm all over the place, look at me. Remember when I told you that one of the things that they do in the Hebrew language, one of the things that the biblical writers do across the board, I mean, even in the New Testament, is they'll set up a repeating rhythm and then they'll break it. And what they're telling you is pay attention to what broke the rhythm. So we see that in some of the parables that Christ tells. We see that in things like the genealogies. So you look for these irregularities because it means this is important. This means something. So now we've got this formula, right? When Enoch had lived 65 years, he became the father of Methuselah. We all know that name because it's a name for an old person. Do you guys know what Methuselah means? He who brings death. right? I had no idea. Or he who dies, or he who brings death, or it's one of those things where it's hard to really translate words, but it has to do with the entrance of death. Now, Methuselah, we know, is the oldest person in the Bible, which is why we use his name to talk about somebody being really old. But that's not what's most interesting. When Enoch had lived 65 years, he was a really young guy. He became the father of Methuselah. Enoch walked with God after the birth of Methuselah 300 years and had other sons and daughters. That's not what it's supposed to say. It's supposed to say Jared lived after the birth of Enoch 800 years. Mahalalel lived after the birth of Jared 830 years. Enoch walked with God after the birth of Methuselah 300 years and had other sons and daughters. Huh. Right? So he walked with God. That's a very important phrase, obviously. Thus, all the days of Enoch were 365 years. Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. 365, right? The fullness of a human lifespan. 365 being the year, it's using that number to kind of communicate to us that this came full circle. This was the fullness of his life. That's going to become important because right next, Methuselah is going to have a child at 182. Right? Yeah, 187. I'm sorry, 187, which is half of 365. 182. Wait, it says 187? Never mind. But yeah, it's all there. I just can't do math. Oh, Lamech lived 182 years, and he became the father of Noah. So it gets to there. All right. I knew it was in there somewhere. So all the days of Enoch were 365. Enoch walked with God. It says it twice in the section. It's supposed to be 365 years and he died, right? Instead of and he died, Enoch walked with God and he was not, for God took him. Interesting. If you look at Jewish commentaries, they will say this doesn't mean he didn't die. They'll say, oh, it just meant he walked with God and then God took him. And he was not, for God took him, which could be a Semiticism for, being taken up to heaven and being taken in, dying. If you read the New Testament, obviously, we see him as not having died, that he was taken up into heaven like Elijah will be later on the fiery chariot. Which the fiery chariot is sometimes seen as the throne of God, but that's a whole other story that's really fascinating when we get to that point. All right, but this whole idea of Enoch walking with God. So there's a couple things about it. The one is it's a beautiful phrase that he spent his life walking with God. Was he following did he have the covenant with Noah? It's before that, right? Did he have the Abrahamic covenant that I will make of you a great nation and you will be my people and I'll be your God? Nope. Did he have Moses's covenant with the 10 commandments that this is how you love me and how you love others? Right? So Enoch had none of the commandments, none of the teaching, none of these books had been written. He didn't have any of the histories. He simply walked with God. It's a really encouraging thing when you stop and contemplate it, because what it means is that we can all be Enochs. Just because we don't have the knowledge, just because we don't have the revelation, just because we don't have the scriptures, just because we don't have X, Y, and Z does not mean we cannot encounter and walk with God. And Enoch's kind of the patron of all that he desired God, he desired communion with God. I would say walking with God is an image of communion. And so he entered into the life of the Holy Trinity and he walked with God. Okay? Now, why was he taken up without dying? I'll just let you think about that for a while. Nobody knows. Not even the church fathers, we just don't know. It's very interesting when you like to play with Bible stuff that you have two persons in the Old Testament who don't die, who are taken up without dying. Enoch, and then, like I said, later on, Elijah. Some people say Moses. No, Moses did die and he was buried, but they hid his tomb so that nobody would raid it, basically, or that nobody would go there to worship him too. But you have Enoch and Elijah. In the book of Revelation, it says that the 2 witnesses will be killed in the streets of the city in the last times. So a lot of people speculate, there's nothing in scripture to make this firm, that Elijah and Enoch will come and be killed so that they can then enter through death and through Christ's tomb and resurrection, and they can enter into the kingdom as well with him. Now, where are they now? Yeah, that's a good question. There seems to be in Hebraic thought especially, but even when you start looking at some New Testament authors, paradise and heaven are not the same thing. Okay? Eden is paradise. Heaven is the kingdom of God with him at his throne. Okay? So the sense is that Enoch and Elijah are in the Garden of Eden, that they're in paradise, living the way that humanity was meant to live in communion with God.
What does that say about cross?
What did I say? What?
What about with the thief on the cross, when Jesus says,
Yeah.
"We'll do with me in paradise"? Is he talking about Eden or heaven or?
You'd have to ask him. Right? But Christ went through there. I love the story. I mean, the penitent thief and everything like that. I don't know. I mean, that's the best answer I can give you. I don't know. These are all things that are kind of extra biblical. It's from the tradition. It's mostly people trying to work these things out and think about them and make these connections. To the honest answer, we have no idea. It doesn't say where Enoch is anywhere, but it's got to be a good place because he walked with God, right? It doesn't say where Elijah went, except that it's got to be a good place because a fiery chariot came out from the heavens and took him up into the sky, into the heavenly realm, so where exactly they're staying, C.S. Lewis has this great trilogy of the Paralandria. So each of the planets, so Mars had an Eden as well, but they never disobeyed God and they kept his commandments. And so it's all these perfectly innocent and, loving beings that live on Mars. Then you go to Venus and that's like another Eden that's just getting started, and he goes and sees that. And you can of course have Earth where they're all trying to fight over everything. I think they might call it the Space Trilogy or something like that, but the first book is Paralandria, or Out of the Silent Planet. It's a really weird sci-fi thing, so just be warned about that. It's not like a lot of other stuff he wrote, but it's really fascinating because it plays with these ideas. What if you hadn't? What if we all walked with God? What would that kind of a place look like? What if we were there in the garden? What would we do and how would we stop things? Anyway, it's real spooky. The second book is rough because that's when he's on Venus and the evil one comes and basically fights with him as he's trying to get through and back to Earth. Anyway, that was a really big tangent. Sorry, guys. All right, but it's important because this idea of walking with God. Now, we don't know where Enoch is, but we know that he serves as an example of being faithful to God without all the covenant, without all the teaching, without all the Torah, without all the law, without all those things. So you can make the argument even, St. Paul makes it all the way back to Paul, but you can push all the way back to Enoch and say he walked with God. You can even push all the way back to Seth and said he began to call upon the name of the Lord. So there was this opportunity for communion. It wasn't completely severed. God was still present to his people, but not in the way that he is now after the incarnation. Okay? All right. So Methuselah had lived 870 years, verse 25. When Methuselah had lived 187 years, he became the father of Lamech. Methuselah lived after the birth of Lamech 782 years and had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Methuselah were 969 years, and he died. Okay, so good. We're back on target. We're back on the pattern. All right, so now Lamech, does that name sound familiar to you? I always felt bad because I was like, I get these guys mixed up and I would always think, oh gosh, I can't even, but they're the same name. Back in verse 19, chapter 4.
Oh,
right? So Enoch, Cain's Enoch, was born Irad. Irad was the father of Mehujael. Sounds an awful lot like Mahalalel. And Mehujael, the father of Methushael. Methuselah, Methushael. Like literally, there's like 2 letters difference. Right? Shael. Yeah. Interesting. Okay. And he was the father of Lamech. Same spelling, everything. Lamech is the one who said, I have slain a man for wounding me, a young man for striking me. If Cain is avenged 7-fold, truly Lamech 77-fold. And this is why you're allowed to listen to Avenged Sevenfold, because sorry, that's actually where they got the name for the band, is from this. Yeah, it's from Avenged Sevenfold. It's from the Bible. Not that their songs are very biblically grounded, though. There's some interesting stuff. Anyway, we got 9 minutes, so I need to focus. So you have Lamech being kind of the height of the violence of mankind and the arrogance that he was taking as many wives as he wanted, and then he'll, kill whoever he wants, and he's just gonna do whatever he wants and follow his own will and just ignore the existence of God entirely. And now we have Lamech show up again. When Lamech had lived 182 years, he became the father of a son and called his name Noah, saying, now this Lamech did not live to the fullness of his time. Do you see that? He didn't get to 365, it was 182. So there's a sense within the kind of Hebrew numerology, if you want to think of it in those terms, that he lived half his life. He wasn't quite complete when he had Noah. Okay? And that's really interesting because of what he says. He called his name Noah, saying, and by the way, there's a lot of stuff you can do with Hebrew roots. I'm not very good at it, but you add, basically, Noah means to bring God's consolation or God's relief. It's not God's deliverance, it's God's consolation. It's really fascinating how the actual roots of the words click together, but I don't know Hebrew that well, so I apologize. When Lamech had lived 182 years, he became the father of son, and he called his name Noah, saying, out of the ground, there's that word. We haven't heard that word in a long time, right? Adamah, out of the soil, out of the ground, which the Lord has cursed. So now it's jumping back to chapter 3 with the curses, right? So out of this ground, the cursed Adamah, this one shall bring us relief from our work and from the toil of our hands. Ooh. What was the curse upon the ground? Right? That the toil of our hands, and you work and you eat by the sweat of your brow to, otherwise you'd have dust. So now Lamech, who did not reach his fullness, recognizes in his son out of the ground which the Lord has cursed. So now we're right back to chapters 1 through 4, this whole creation, which has gotten to this point, and it's become so corrupted by the work of sin and the distortion and the corruption. Now Noah comes, and it's through Noah that we're going to receive relief from the toil of our hands and relief from our work. And that's going to be through the flood. I never paid attention to that verse. It's so amazing to me to be able to sit down and prepare for these things, because the story so well. You're like, okay, Lamech, now we're at Noah. It's about time, cue the flood. But you don't think about how it's connecting all these things together. It's using the same language. Out of the ground which the Lord has cursed, this one shall bring us relief from our work and from the toil of our hands. So now we get to rest, and Noah's name means the consolation of God. Verse 30, Lamech lived after the birth of Noah 595 years and had other sons and daughters, back in the same rhythm. Thus all the days of Lamech were 777 years, and he died. You know anything about his age? 777, right? So that should be the divine fullness. But did he reach the divine fullness? His son did. What you're going to find, if you do some math, you'll find out something very interesting. We'll do that in just a second. And verse 32. Now we're getting into the new Toledah. You'll hear it right now. After Noah was 500 years old, Noah became the father of Shem, Ham, and Japheth. When man began to multiply on the face of the ground, and we're going to go into chapter 6 next week. So after Noah was 500 years old, Noah became the father of Shem, Ham, and Japheth. We're setting up the next Toledah. So it's nested in the other Toledah, right? It's nested in the other list of generations, because we have Lamech all the way coming down. So Lamech is kind of the culmination of Adam's Toledah, of his generations. And then there's a break, and then you have the generations of Noah, even though it is nestled in like this little nesting dolls. It's nestled within the Toledah of Adam. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. So Lamech should have been the height of that. And you have his name, 777, or he lives for 777 years. There should be something special about him, but there's not. It's that he produced Noah and recognized that he would give them relief from the land. It's a very interesting character, especially when you try to contrast it with Cain's Lamech. In this, he was violent and he was saying, I'll do whatever I want. And now Lamech is saying that God will restore his creation in some way, knowing he'll be baptized. If you do the math, I think this is very interesting. Jumping way ahead, and we'll get there, but chapter 7, verse 6, Noah was 600 years old when the flood of waters came upon the earth. If you're ever really bored one weekend and you want to have some fun, start a chart and write Adam, and then until Enosh, and then how long Adam lived. And then Enosh until, Enosh was Enosh until Kenan, Seth. Okay, Adam until Seth, and you'll start to see how they overlapped. Okay, you'll find something really interesting. When you get to the flood, who died in the flood? Methuselah died in the flood. Who else died in the flood? 777 years old. Lamech. Right? Oh, I didn't hear you say that. Okay. So Methuselah and Lamech both died in the flood that God sent upon the world to get rid of the evil, to get rid of the wickedness, to get rid of all the corruption and the corrosion of sin. And Noah was told and said to build an ark and to bring his family there and to take 2 of each creature. Again, we're going to get to this, don't worry. But who does he not take on the boat? His dad and his granddad. That is fascinating to me. Really interesting. It makes me think of later on when Christ is saying, the people, all these people come out and say they want to be his disciples. And he says, look, a fox has nowhere to lay his head, and there's no, or the fox has no hole, or something. If you follow me, you will not have a hole as do the foxes, and you'll have no place to lay your head with the Son of Man. Right. So he says, you're not going to have this rest. And the other guy says, well, can I go back and take care of my dad? And he says, let the dead bury the dead. And then he says, I've got to go do this with my family. And he says this, he says, he who is not willing to leave his family is not worthy of me. That goes all the way back to the flood. That goes all the way back to Noah. And sometimes we, inadvertently dehumanize the people. We just make them into characters, right? We make them into characters in a story. And we don't think about the fullness of their humanity. But imagine what that must have been like for Noah, knowing what was coming, to be able to leave his father and his grandfather behind. It doesn't sound like they had a bad relationship. It doesn't sound like they were mean. It doesn't say, and Lamech beat him as he grew up. He actually said, out of the ground, which the Lord has cursed, this one shall bring us relief from our work, from the toil of our hands. He probably was pretty close to him. And yet he knew that for God's plan, for God being faithful to God, he had to build the ark and then to take his family. And they were the ones who were going to continue on after the earth had been cleansed and baptized, as we will find out in the next chapters. That won't happen until chapter 7, though. We will get to chapter 6 next week. I actually got through a whole chapter today. Thank you. It's a pretty easy chapter to get through in one class, though, but it's really fascinating. Did you guys think that's neat, or is it just boring genealogy? Yes.
You were saying earlier that God sent the flood because there were no faithful ones.
Yes. We'll read that stuff exactly then.
But if Lamech is saying this stuff about Noah, isn't he faithful? Like, isn't he still kind of faithful?
We'll talk about that in chapter 7. We'll get there. And honestly, I mean, we don't know. There is a sense that there's something not full with Lamech because that 182 thing. But there's nothing, we don't know anything more about that. I've got 20 seconds left, so we're going to go sign off for the radio folks. And then if you guys have other questions, we'll leave this running as well. Jeff, yay, it's neat. Thank you. I think it's neat too. But it's fascinating. Anyway, for those of you who are listening on the radio, thank you so much for listening. And we'll be back next week as well with another set, chapter 6. I said that right as the little alarm was going off. I'm so proud of myself. All right, yeah, so we'll get into chapter 6. Chapter 6 is really fascinating, and I hope I don't get dragged into too many tangents. But this is the one that talks about the Nephilim. And a lot of people have a lot of questions about that, and there's a lot of theories about that. The one that seems to be the most likely is the one that sounds the most outlandish and crazy. Hmm? So,
Giant.
giants, giants. Yeah, well, where do you think Goliath came from? Um, isn't it? I just it's and I'm an admitted biblical nerd. Like I get geeked out of this over the time, but it is amazing to me that after 20 years as a priest, and I'm reading these things, and I read about 4 or 5 different commentaries, a couple of Jewish ones, a couple of Protestant ones, and then about three Orthodox ones, so I kind of get stay grounded in it. But the people who say, oh, the Bible's such a stupid little thing, it's like you have no idea just how intertwined this is, that this goes through all the other books. This was written over 1,000 years by different authors in different times. And yet these themes begin to mesh together and echo over one another and resonate. It's just incredible. Like it's in their stuff in one of the commentaries, they were already talking about stuff that happens in Judges, it's like, wait a second, Judges is like, that's halfway through. We haven't even gotten there yet, but the things that are happening in Judges are reflective of stuff that happens with Abraham and with Moses during the Exodus. And you're not going to figure this stuff out. It's like, oh, the Bible, you can just read that on your own. It's okay. You'll just figure it out. No, you don't know these things. I don't know how to do these number things. That was somebody who had an understanding of Hebrew culture. That was just, and they said, hey, look, this is what they do when they do these numbers. Look at them in the Bible, right? Okay, cool. Somebody else was the one that recognized, wow, that sounds just like that verse we just read back there. I wonder if there's a connection. And then they reflected on that reflection, and you get all these kind of deep insights and everything. But yeah, different math on milestone ages in my Septuagint versus what you have. Yeah, the Septuagint will absolutely. Yeah, no, the Septuagint, there's variations and everything in there. But again, that's why we don't get too caught up in the actual numbers, that we look at the patterns and everything. Yeah, that. Any other questions on Zoom? Where is it? Where's my thumb? Oh, there it is. Yay. Oh, I got it. He gave me a thumbs up. That's cool. I didn't know I could do that. All right. You guys have any other questions?
No.
Okay.
Well, yeah, we have a million questions, just not tonight.
Right. Yeah. You're just being kind to me. It's really, yeah, you guys, you can hear it in my voice. I just think this stuff is crazily cool. All right.
Me too.
Great.
Alex, yeah, she thinks it's crazy cool too.
Yes. Crazy cool. That'll be our new Bible study name. Crazy cool Bible study. All right. I'm going to start shutting off the feed, so I will talk to you later. The baptism, we've had one last change. The baptisms, I think you already heard this though. The baptism is going to be the same place where we did the blessing the lake at 115 Fawn Lane, FAWN Lane. And so if you kind of go past the houses there, you'll see a kind of a strip of land between water. It's really cool. Park off the road on the side, and you'll go to your left, you'll go down a little hill for about 20 yards, and you'll see a little beach right there. That's where we'll have it. So if you plan on coming, please note that. It will be at 11 a.m. And I have to get started right on time, because Kelly has to go to Greensboro for something. She's like, I want to be there for his baptism. So we'll get it going. All right. And now we will shut down all the feeds. Okay. Goodbye, radio feed. Boop. Nice. Okay. Export to MP3. And goodbye, Zoom. I guess it's goodbye, YouTube, really.